Hi, good evening. It's Sarah Loudon with Total Health Conferencing, and I'm here with another inspired interview tonight on marketing and PR in the new world. So this is a podcast vlog that I really think is going to be meaningful to a lot of people, especially since so many of us are either small business owners or managers of, the marketing or the outward facing functions of companies that we work within. And I have tonight with me two leaders in the field of marketing and PR who will both share with you their experience, what they've been doing, what has been resonating in each one of their fields, and what they just think overall of this new world and where we're going, so that we get the benefit of applying those things to our own businesses. So I know I'm really looking forward to this interview because I feel like so much of it I'll glean for my own business. And as we go forward, we can start to talk about what that will look like. So this is a Facebook Live and it's also a podcast. And during the Facebook Live, please feel free to ask questions. I will be all night looking into the chat function of Facebook Live to be asking our two guests to answer. So let us know who you are, what your business is like, and then specific questions that you'd like answered so that we can really get the benefit of their expertise to apply to our businesses. So I would like to introduce my two guests tonight, Diana Bodden, who has built her career really in pharmaceutical and diagnostics for oncology. She's a serial launcher and commercial optimizer for both large and startup companies. And we'll get to define some of these things, which I also think is going to be really important. She's built and led several multidisciplinary marketing departments for upstream and downstream success. And again, I think, as we dive deeper into what both these terms mean and how marketers look at businesses and look at consumers very differently than, the way other functions in organizations do, we'll definitely start to see if we can put on that hat and apply those things to our own businesses, how strong that will be. We are also joined with Shira Kastan Goldstein from the ADG Strategy Group. She's both founder and principal of that group, and they provide creative strategies and solutions to organizations looking to achieve new levels of success. Her diverse experience and expertise in media, public relations, both government and advocacy, as well as strategy and business development, really are what make her unique to be able to tell the story of businesses. And again, one of the first things we'll do as I turn the floor over to the ladies is to have them really define marketing and PR in business and how this affects really the way we consume information, materials, etc. So thank you to both of you for joining me for this. I'm really excited about having you both here. I always feel as much the student as I am the moderator, so I appreciate your time and expertise. And Diana, I just want to start with you. Maybe give us a little picture of the types of things you do, and then we'll move on to Shira and have her do the same, and then we'll get into some of the definitions of the difference between marketing and PR.
That sounds great, Sarah. Thanks so much for having me. If at any time the audio cuts out, let me know, and I'll work magic to the best of my ability. So the way I look at marketing is identifying what the customer need is and bringing a solution to fulfill that need. And that can be, the local ice cream shop, or it could be in specifically the realm that I operate in, which is oncology, therapeutics, and diagnostics. So, having a really good and firm idea of what the true customer needs are, what the pain points are, and how your solution can either be developed to address those needs, or if you're already in a situation where the solution has been developed, how do you optimize it for that particular customer?
So Diana, before I move on to Shira, would you say that marketing in the roles that you've held really starts with understanding what it is that you're trying to convey, or is it knowing the product first? What do you think, if you're talking to a general audience where they might be wearing the hats of a lot of things and marketing is just one of them, what do you think the core of where you'll be speaking from really focuses on?
I think that's a really insightful question, because as you might imagine, depending on the marketing discipline in a particular organization, you may come at it in different ways. For example, I grew up in the pharmaceutical space, where understanding what the need was of the market drove the product development. In other companies that I've been involved in more recently, we have this thing and I need to get this thing into the marketplace, so I'm gonna shove it into the market, if you will. So you know, a purist, and you know, nobody can really be a purist about anything these days, but a purist would say, well, you know, we have to identify what the customer needs are first before we develop the solution and then roll it out to the customers. But I think, you know, truly real life is all about compromise. And most times there's a kernel or a nugget of an idea that's already germinated, and then it would be, you know, for the likes of strategists as well as marketers to help define really where that's going to go, what that's going to look like.
Thank you. Thank you. Shira, same question. You know, maybe just frame what your role is, and then where you start from when you're thinking about the product or the service that it is that you're looking to kind of provide that PR backbone for.
So one of the first things we do with our clients and the work that we manage is really looking at their strategy and their business development channels, understanding who their clients currently are, and also trying to define what additional opportunities that they're not providing a service to that could become an opportunity for them. So we always work with our clients in developing their strategic roadmaps or strategic plans, or even if it's just defining what their goals are, right? You have to know what you're going after and why you're going after it, and really defining that. You know, I agree with Diana with, you know, marketing is different than the public relations piece, and is different than your business strategy, but they're really all tied together.
Yeah, I was actually going to ask that, you know, when you're thinking about a product, and especially, you know, let me say the majority of the audience will be people that maybe have had a well-oiled machine, something that they've been able to kind of push out to a specific audience using a specific strategy, kind of encompassing a specific message. And then sometime in the beginning of March, everything about that changed. And so now it's very much like grasping at, well, what do I do? How do I still get this message out? How do I still get these products out? How do I attract a customer in this new world where maybe attracting a customer means that I've got to develop all of these virtual channels? So when we're thinking about marketing, PR, and strategy, are these all working in tandem? Does one come before the other? Shira, maybe you can speak to that, and then we'll ask that same question of Diana, depending on where marketing fits in.
So I've always appreciated the opportunity of, I call it my whiteboarding with my clients and defining their strategies, and then breaking that. Then you take their strategies, any client, any organization, any company, taking those strategies and really breaking down then, okay, what are your initiatives and your tactics associated with that? And what are the goals that you want to accomplish in a certain time frame, 6 months, a year, 2 years? So to me, I believe you have to define your strategies first. I always say strategic roadmaps do two things for a company, right? It gives you an idea of where you want to be and how to get there, but it also tells you what activities you should stop doing. Right? I don't know any company that doesn't necessarily, I can't think of a company that does it perfectly, right? But there's always those opportunities where, you know, opportunities come your way and you say yes, and you say yes, and you say yes. There's also things that you take on that you probably should have said no to, you know, and you keep kind of loading up the boat and loading up the boat. But there's an opportunity when you write those strategies out and all of a sudden have that moment and realize, maybe we're spending so much energy and time and money and resources on a particular line of service that we really should not be offering. It's not our expertise.
Yeah, what a great lesson that's so often hard and expensively learned by business owners, and expense both in time, money, resources, human resources, because especially when you're new or when you're trying to differentiate or you're trying to survive, like a lot of people are doing now, you're saying yes to everything because you don't necessarily know what to say no to. And it's only really through your experience of, that took double the time, double the money for half the income, that makes you realize, those are not things that you want to invest in. So Diana, kind of piggybacking on what Shira was talking about, when you're thinking about developing marketing plans, do you always start similarly with kind of whiteboarding what it is you're trying to say? Like, tell me a little bit about the process in which a true marketer looks at a product and sets their strategy.
Well, you're right. I mean, so the corporate objectives certainly filter down into the marketing objectives, and you have to come up with, and this should be a collective discussion with all the members, the executive team, and even all the employees within an organization. What are strategic imperatives for, whether it's the brand, whether it's the line of products, whether it's the service, what is it we need to get done? And then from there come your strategies, follow-on tactics, and so on and so forth. But, you said something earlier that I wanted to maybe circle back on and clarify. One of the things I think that even individually owned businesses might be able to improve during this time is listening a little bit more, identifying what that pain point is for the customer, segmenting customer base, and modifying messaging appropriately, because the whole one size fits all from a messaging perspective really doesn't work anymore. And what it might do, and you've alluded to it already in your comments, is bring forth almost too many lines of business. Not just separate messaging channels, but different lines of business, and you'll have to make a determination where the time is best spent for the return that you're looking for. But that segmentation of customers, imperative, listening to the market, trying to understand what the market needs. And I mean, you mentioned it in your earlier email to this group about adaptation, and if we don't adapt, we die. Yeah. And if you don't adapt, you won't be successful. And so that constant state of listening and responding and listening and responding, it's an incredibly dynamic field, and you can create fantastic plans at the beginning of the year, but if you're not referencing and updating them continually and seeing if the goal has moved, then you're doing your business a real disservice.
I love that. I really love everything that you've said, because you've, I think, put into words what a lot of people have experienced over the last 3 months. And again, you may have been in a position where you were, you're a photographer, you're an audiovisual person, you're like me, a medical education company, where you found this sweet spot and you're like, I'm comfortable here. This is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to sell. This is where I want to be. This is the size business I want to be. And all of those things kind of created this complacency where, maybe you weren't striving, you found where you wanted to be. And just like you said, if you weren't checking in, if you weren't diversifying, if you weren't segmenting, if you weren't planning and preparing for fluctuations in the market, whether it be a global pandemic or just these little shifts in, the way people consume things, you really were setting yourself up to be unprepared at this time. So let's maybe talk about, where we were. We now have the definition of, marketing strategy, PR. Let's maybe start talking a little bit about practical things. So let's say you are a small business. You did have your ducks in a row. You knew exactly who your customers were. You knew the message or messages that you had to reach those people. You were stable in the way you were meeting those goals, and then COVID-19 hits. What if, I know a lot of people have been in, let's throw everything at the wall, I myself included, let's throw everything at the wall, see what works, because you turn into survival desperation mode. You want to keep your team together. You want to keep your dream together. But let's maybe say, all right, now that we could take a beat, what should we be doing from a marketing perspective? Diana, I'm going to start with you. What questions should small business owners, really any business owner, be asking themselves regarding how do I market this particular product or service?
Thank you. I mean, you and I have both sat in front of the TV with our kids and seen the ads that have come through that have been, like, hey, we're here for you, we're in this together type of thing. And I think that acknowledgement goes a long way to a certain extent.
Yeah.
One of the things is that's absolutely germane is that it's not just lip service, but that the company, the initiative, the product actually not only is acknowledging, but then fills another gap that your customer might be experiencing. So whether that's, your bank has given you another 3 months leeway before the next mortgage payment is due, or the car payment, or so on and so forth. So the words don't mean anything unless they're actually backed with something else. And to me, that's kind of like the big aha as it relates to COVID, because as you mentioned, absolutely every business, every person has been impacted by this, whether directly or indirectly. And, I guess meeting customers, your consumers, where they are, both intellectually, physically, if possible, and certainly mentally and emotionally. Are you a company they would want to do business with in this particular time? Are you living the values that you're communicating in your blanket messaging currently?
Yeah, it's taking the question, I think what a lot of us didn't do, it's taking the question from me focused, owner focused, and putting it customer focused. You're saying, who was I before to my customers? Who can I continue to be at this time where things are so uncertain? And then what will I grow to be able to offer them that maybe uniquely I could offer them, versus what will I do with my company? How will I stay in survival mode? So I do think that is probably such good guidance, because it is your customers are your lifeline. So if you're not looking through the lens of their needs, and you're looking more through the lens of your fear of what you could lose, I think you're almost defeating the purpose of, developing these marketing plans or strategies to move forward. So I really love that. Are you a company that they would like to continue to do business with? Shira, building on that, how do you then take that perspective and turn it into a campaign?
So one thing that comes to mind, since I've done a variety of advocacy campaigns, is to not underestimate who your current partners are, right? And I like to use the analogy of, your local ice cream shop or your local pizza store that for so many years has stood by the little leagues and the community organization and helped them and sponsored them. But now those same restaurants and those same business providers are now hurting, right? So I always say you start with who your current clients are and who your current partners are, and really utilizing your first messaging to start with them, right? I think the reason a lot of the messaging, as Diana noted, of, we're here in this together, we're here for you, because truly we have been for so many years.
Yes.
So on a community level, when you start going into every individual smaller community, right, whether it's in Coral Springs or in Brooklyn, New York, those community zip codes have all been a tight-knit community for so many years. I always say rely on your partners first, and your partners could literally be that little league team that you've helped sponsor as a restaurant. So I really believe that it starts with that, and using all your local channels, right? If you're a small business, there's a wealth of marketing channels that maybe you don't have the same level of funding like a Target would have to market and advertise and buy commercial TV time. But I think there is adaptability is the key word. I heard Diana say it, I've heard you say it. And actually I wrote it down in my notes as well before we started, because it's really the way of how do you adapt, right? It's almost the boots on the ground, and now we have to kind of do grassroots advocacy for ourselves. And who do we start with? So really, you know, just making the community realize that we've been here with you and we continue to be here with you, and now we need you.
Yeah. You know, there's such an emotionality with everything going on, you know, whether you are an executive at a multi-million-dollar organization, whether you are the owner or operator of a long-standing family business, whatever industry. I think, Shira, you and I were talking earlier, you know, before this, there is no industry that this situation has not affected in some way. Or whether you're a startup company, a single product company, a service company, all of us have been dealing with such deep emotions about our business, but maybe even more so as individuals. So you're experiencing the situation individually and kind of with your family. You're experiencing it through the media's perspective. And you're trying to operate a business, and you're trying to develop new strategies and marketing tactics and, you know, campaigning and all those things. So Diana, you know, how do you almost separate yourself, compartmentalize what you're going through emotionally, or do you, when you're developing these marketing ideas and notions and then plans? Should you be incorporating this kind of shared emotional feeling in the way you're thinking about marketing your business now that we're in this new space?
Briefly, yes, absolutely, positively. And I think depending on the industry that you're in, there will be varying levels of that. Some industries are so very highly regulated that you may not be able to communicate that effectively. But if we look at our local communities, something that resonates with me, I live in a seaside village here on the West Coast, and the local village, I follow them on Facebook, like to see what they're happening. They say, well, now, you know, you've asked these small local businesses 100 times to support your little league or the choir club at the high school, you know, now please come support them. It means the world. And it really does. So, you know, I don't want to get too far over my skis and talking about topics I'm not that familiar with, because my experience has been healthcare marketing, and specifically in oncology. But to me, again, that's meeting your customer where they are. And that's that intellectual, emotional, mental connection, acknowledging it, identifying it in your communications. And I don't want to say putting it behind you, because it should always color what you're doing. Now, the discussions that are held in a boardroom at a big pharmaceutical company might be quite different than the discussions that are held at the local pizza parlor amongst the owners and managers there. But ideally, you know, I think those companies that are the most successful are those that don't forget about the human touch. There were several companies I've recently done business with, and it was interesting how things seem to have started to pivot even before COVID, where we put the human back in healthcare. And I'm like, yes, thank you. Because at the end of the day, all decision makers are human.
Yes.
And, you know, that's where we have to be connected.
You know, it's so interesting that you say that. And Shira, I want your take on this. I started, again, it's like, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. So when all of this happened, and it was like, what are we going to do with live events? And one of the first things that came as an opportunity to Total Health was pursuing the patient advocacy approaches and being able to elevate the patient's voice in the things that we were offering. So where we were completely focused on the drug developer or the diagnostic provider before, all of a sudden it was like, yeah, but how are you going to reach the customer? Oh, I know. Let's invite the customer into the conversation. And so I hosted these town halls, simple, you know, basic structure. And I have to tell you, there was the chief medical officer of the chief medical officer of Pfizer was on one of our virtual town halls. And it was kind of like, you know, it was very, this is what we're going to talk about, and this is kind of the compliance zone of what we're allowed to say. Well, during one of the simple little mid dialogues, I said to him, something like, you know, you and I talked about how difficult this was. He lived in New York City, how difficult this was in the beginning and just how emotional it was. And he went off script. Forget about, he didn't do it on purpose, but he went off script and he said, I didn't know what to do at that time. I knew that I had this team to lead. I knew that I had very important science to pursue and I should have had like this laser-like focus, but I was so emotional. And he's like, I really had to take a week to just, you know, like take everything in and think about how I'm thinking of it, whatever. I got to tell you, from that, it had to have been 3 minutes. I got emails saying it's the first time I ever saw a pharmaceutical company humanized, like knowing that they weren't thinking about profits, that guy felt just like me. And I shared it with the team, the Pfizer team. I even had a company representative from another company write and say, that day I bought Pfizer stock. And I thought to myself, how strange was that moment? But Shira, maybe from a PR perspective, you can give us a glimpse of what exactly happened that allowed people to almost not see the canned script, but to see the human behind this chief medical officer.
So I think it goes back to something we mentioned a little while ago, right? Is no one's been affected. And when we say that, I don't think we mean companies per se, right? We're all people and we've all been affected in some way. And I think sometimes, you know, we've all seen the anecdotes and the jokes about, you know, those that are going to Zoom meetings now and are a lot more feeling more, they're in a relaxed atmosphere versus having to dress up a certain way and then drive to work and sit in a boardroom and act a certain way. I think certain layers have been removed from every individual of, listen, I'm at home and I'm working and I'm homeschooling my children and I'm taking care and trying to keep the house from burning. So I think every human person has been affected, not just here in the US, right, but across the world.
Yeah.
So there really isn't an individual, companies aside, that hasn't felt the pain of some sort, just people who have lost loved ones to COVID. So I think I think this is an emotional time for all individuals and they connected, right? There's certain companies that sometimes it's felt like they're scripted. Yes. Maybe right at that moment, I wasn't there for that moment, you were, and listening to you describe it, I felt like I was just there listening to you. It feels like the individuals that were part of that town hall really connected with that chief medical officer, because for a moment there, they were just being human, because we tend to kind of be a little mechanical sometimes where we have to be a certain way in the workplace.
Yeah, it was such a moment for me. And I want to invite those that are watching to ask any questions in the Facebook Live. I actually have some that have come through. You know, Shira and Diana, both of you talked about leveraging, you know, who companies were there for, businesses were there for, especially on the local level. So someone asked, how should this communication go out? Should we be emailing those customers, calling them at this sensitive time? Should it be a personal plea, and will I look vulnerable? So as you both were talking about, you know, those little league teams that were always supported by the local paint store or, you know, the organic grocery store, how should that outreach look? Diana, maybe I'll start with you from a marketing perspective.
I think what really struck me about the communication that I told you about was the fact that it was just so earnest and simple. You know, it's like, they've been here for you. And you can imagine, I'll you know, say it's a pressed juicery or some sort of smoothie shop that's within a mile of the high school. You can imagine that they get hit up constantly. But yet, you know, are people deciding to stay at home and use their blender and make their own smoothies, or are they, you know, still engaging? So the fact that people are leveraging email communications, I think, is perfectly adequate during this time. Signs in the window, you know, leveraging your other partners, as was mentioned. You know, in this case, the Village is helping to communicate for some of these vendors. I look at pharmaceutical industry, I look at the diagnostic space, and I think it's reasonably okay to continue to ask physicians, for example, or to educate physicians, to ask for patient care as patients are coming back into the clinic, you know, to ask that your product be remembered. But I think that's a fine line as well. You know, everybody's working under different circumstances. You did a beautiful job explaining all the things that you as a, you know, professional woman are trying to balance. So imagine a physician and balancing patients and, you know, trying to not turn off a source of information like a pharmaceutical rep or a marketing department, but trying to glean those important bits. So I think it's imperative on all of us to be really concise in our communications, target them appropriately, as mentioned before, and make sure we are asking or laying it out there very clearly what we want that customer to do. We want you to come in and buy a smoothie, you know. And I think anybody would be like, I'm not going to bring my stamp card this time because I know you need that extra money. I don't want a freebie on you right now. Right. And the same might be true. You know, it's this position of respect that we should hold for each other right now, that space to be who we are, but to also be respectful of the business.
Yes, I love that, you know, again, just how you break it down to what it is and what it is we're asking for. Shira, in that concise ask, is it okay to be vulnerable from a PR perspective? Is it okay to say we need you?
I think it's a case-by-case basis, depending on what your product is, right? So I'll give you an example of the Gordon Center for Simulation and Innovation in Medical Education. And they're truly leaders in that simulation world and training first responders, training medical students, physician assistants, and a lot of frontline folks. They had to adapt and taking all of their learning online and offering free classes for certain types of trainings for first responders. In that case, given the brand that they're affiliated with, they weren't vulnerable per se in their messaging. I think depending on what the brand is that you represent, you know, I do agree with Diana about the message needs to be concise. Yeah. Diana mentioned that you got to tell them what you need them to do, right? I often call it my call to action, right? Your message should have a call to action. You know, but if you're talking about, you know, like the Targets of the world, right? We'll usually send you notifications on your phone from their app or whatnot, depending on how robust or not robust your database is, right? It really is a case-by-case basis. You know, do you email them? Do you send them notifications on your on apps if you have one? Do you just post it on your social media pages? You know, when you're talking about a smaller business, more community-driven business, and I think of the examples of the restaurants a lot because I've seen it so much in the last 3 months, is offering specials, right? It's like you don't necessarily have to say we need you or you know, here's what we need you to do. You put a special out there, right? Like a family dinner. I think all of us, whenever one in our community offered one, we jumped on it because we also needed a break from cooking for one night. Or we want to support that local. My conversation with my husbands have been, who do you want to support this week when we order out? So I think your message shifts. It doesn't have to be so prescribed in a certain way. I think ultimately, you know, everybody knows how to communicate to their customers because they've worked with them for so long. Yeah. But you got to put it out there.
Yeah, no, I think that, you know, that's good advice. And I think, again, it crosses over, you know, all industries in terms of create those concise messages and call to actions along with it, and then use that, how it applies to all different types of businesses. Another question that I have here is, should we be looking to maintain our business or to grow our businesses right now? So, you know, there's a lot of people that right away, you know, the restaurant industry, no one there is asking how can we grow. Well, very few are asking how can we grow our business. But is this something that's almost like a mental thing, where you are thinking about right now, oh, I just need to survive, versus right now I need to kind of think strategically of how I grow? Diana, what would your answer be to this listener? Should we be looking to maintain or grow right now?
Well, the foundation of growth is really having your skill set at its optimum place. So a lot of companies, specifically in the healthcare space, have been using this, I'll do, virtual air quotes here, downtime to sharpen the sword. So to become better masters at what it is they do. And, I think you do have an opportunity to grow the business, an opportunity to continue to bring value to the customers, whether it's through these, curated sound bites, building on a particular customer's knowledge from one week to the next, all the while making sure that you're not inundating them, with too many communications, because as we talked about, life goes on in many different capacities for each of us. I think there is a possibility in the way you conduct yourself during this time. Again, are you that stand-up company that people are going to want to do business with, will reflect not only today, but your client base for the future. So can you grow additional fans and champions during this time so that you come out on the other end with a more robust customer base? And, Shira, you said it, and it's, certainly one of the tenets of marketing is know who your customers are, know who your targets are. And if you haven't categorized them and chronicled them in a particular way, use this time to do that. Otherwise, you think about all the work that you put into your business up to this point, you really don't have anything to leverage in this time when you can't be in front of them directly if you don't have a CRM, a database of your customers or targets, and sort of what their behavior has been and how you think about them in relation to your business. And how do you segment them if you don't have that information? So I know we're speaking to sort of all comers on this particular call. And it's not always easy to do, especially after the fact, after you've already engaged with them and haven't had a conversation or haven't gathered bits of information about them, so that you can, in a non-creepy way, follow up and, improve your offering for them.
Yeah, and that's such a good point. I think that I actually took that so for granted, when Shira said, use your list of customers. There are businesses that have operated without, they're curating that list of customers, because in past times they didn't require doing that. Whether you had the little stamp cards, membership, buy 5 smoothies, get 1 free. Those were just little stamps on cards. They weren't necessarily asking you, unless they were a big brand, Jamba Juice or something, they weren't necessarily asking you, can you fill in this information and it'll be this electronic database. The local ice cream stores and things like that never had that. So using this time, Diana, thank you for saying that, using this time to develop those lists, pull from whatever you can to develop those lists, and then start looking at those lists and segmenting, who are these people and what are we trying to say to them at different times during this in order to maintain or grow the business is definitely essential. Diana, you said something and it immediately kind of hit me. You said when you're growing fans and champions for like when we come out of this. So Shira, I'm going to ask you, using your crystal ball, and I actually, I bought a crystal ball. I bought a crystal ball because I was on a call with someone who said to me, well, I don't know when we're going to come out of this. I don't have a crystal ball, do you? And I was like, no, I don't. And then I bought one. So it hasn't told me anything yet. It just, it looks straight through into the other side of my desk. So far, I haven't picked up the skill yet. But using your crystal ball, Shira, when are we getting out of this, and what is it going to look like? And does it have a big impact on the way we market and campaign?
So before I answer that, I just wanted to add one thing to the question we just answered about stopping or growing our business. I have some dear friends who own a company and business did slow down for them, but what they did have on their to-do list for a very long time is, they really wanted to rebrand the company. They've really used this quieter time. They've still been, relatively busy, but they've used this quieter time to really rebrand and do that entire process. It takes, Dan will tell you, it takes a really long time to come up with that new brand, to come up with logo designs, to come up with a new website and all the elements that go alongside that. And they've used this quieter time to evolve and are now going to launch a new brand. But I always say there's exceptions to everything in life. Is when you talk about growing your business, there's a lot of companies, especially in healthcare and as it relates to the front lines, there's a lot of companies that had to adapt and evolve through this crisis where, and I'll give you an example, there's a company that was in the sports industry that did sports uniforms. Well, we all know sports have slowed down significantly and we don't know when many will get back to doing regular business again. But they've evolved their company right now in an effort to keep their employees employed to make face masks.
Yeah.
Right. And using the fact that they have those capabilities and the employees that sew materials for a living to create masks. And so I always say to companies, if you have a relevant product that can be utilized for any company that needs certain products, this is the time to get out there. And you call it growing your business, but I say this is your time to hustle. Yeah. And make the world known that you have those products that the world's been looking for. It could be masks, right? There's this conversation about testing, and then testing doesn't just come with a test. You got to have laboratory equipment and laboratories and individuals to run those labs. As we're talking about healthcare as well, is there's an opportunity for companies to not just grow, but to really evolve. And this is like that opportunity they waited for to shine with their companies and products that are available. So I just wanted to add that. As far as the crystal ball, that's the $1 million question. I don't truly believe anybody knows that answer yet, right? And you can look at the stocks today and the last couple of days, and stocks may have been going up, but if you talk to financial analysts and the experts that do this for a living, they'll tell you to expect some dip come in the third quarter. So I don't think we're out of the woods yet. Health experts talk about this second wave and they talk about the flu season. So I personally do not know. I keep hearing the references of let's just get through this year. Yeah. Close out 2020. And I think all we could do is hope and pray and stick together and help our fellow neighbors. But I don't have that magic answer.
Do you feel that there are things that we've learned in this time, or maybe not even learned, but utilized because of, needing to, that will stay for the long run?
I think there, especially in healthcare, I think there's a lot of changes that have to come about. So, whether it's, I hear health systems that I work with talk about, their waiting rooms having to change and be redesigned for social distancing. I don't think social distancing is going to disappear overnight. I think the way business is going to have to evolve as well. I'm looking at Diana, she's shaking her head. I think one thing, as you say, I've done a lot of work in the lobbying space, right? State government, federal governments. I do see opportunities of things that are here to stay. I think as it relates to telemedicine capabilities, I mentioned it as we were chatting before we started. Telemedicine is not something that has been adopted statewide, at least in the state of Florida. I think now COVID overnight has taken physician practices and allowed them to get on telemedicine capabilities with patients, whether it's mental health or whether it's primary care, whether it's pediatrics or adults. I think telemedicine is all of a sudden evolved in like, this is the new norm and this is okay. And no one's gotten hurt and everything is fine. And I think a new conversation about telemedicine that, at least again, for the state of Florida, has not been adopted fully or reimbursed for that matter. I think this is now something that's going to stick around.
Mm-hmm. And Diana, when it comes to marketing for all different types of businesses, even outside of healthcare, are there things that you hope, you know, that you've observed other companies doing and paying attention to that you hope will stick around whenever we get out of this?
I do like the virtualization of events, and you know, certainly you're one to probably best speak about that. I mean, I've seen recently announced through LinkedIn and a variety of other channels that big conventions are getting rebooked, and I think that's great. But it makes me wonder: are we missing out on the potential reach to communicate and educate others by not also hosting a virtual event right along with? I know that's a logistical nightmare, and that's why we have wonderful folks like you to help us figure that out. But to me, that's something that we should really continue to support. I 100% agree with the telemedicine, the remote health monitoring. It will give fuel to a whole new industry, or an industry that's been, sort of bumping along, but has an opportunity to really take off right now. I think platforms like Zoom. I think there are plenty of opportunities for other potentially more innovative platforms to help with sort of these group conversations. I think we should be okay not traveling into an office. And it makes me worry a little bit for commercial real estate, because if I think about, some of these big companies have just ridiculous expenses tied up in commercial real estate. Well, that's great if they can save the money because their employees are working in part from home. But then what about the companies that are behind the commercial real estate? So there will be this fallout, I guess I'll call it. And fallout's not necessarily a bad thing, although it typically has negative connotations associated with the way we will get back to work and how we will get back to work. But there's also plenty of room for opportunity.
Well, we definitely have learned that a lot of the things that we said we can't have work from home. We can't have 4-day work weeks. We can't have people working, in New York, working for a California company. Well, we can, and we have, and it's been fine. And in many places it's thrived. So, in those things, I think we've experienced kind of a leadership paradigm shift where you say, well, were we saying we can't because we never had? Or were we saying we can't because, something in the company kind of deterred that from happening? But now that we have to live in this world of, I have to, we're seeing all of these innovations from every type of, whether it be local restaurants to, there's a man who, his name's Carlos. I don't know his last name, but I definitely will tag, other people after this, because I do think it's important too, to kind of support these people who are innovating. So this man who lived in a neighborhood that I, very much like your Facebook experience, Diana, the neighborhood that I lived in had this Facebook thing. And very shortly after COVID, I started seeing all these family pictures in, like, their living room couch would be in the middle of the road or in the front of the lawn, and all the family would be on and they'd be doing all these poses and everything. And this photographer, Carlos, would have like a drone pic showing how he was distancing from the family, taking these portraits. And my first reaction was, that's so crazy. Why would anybody want a family portrait during this time? And my very next feeling was, why wouldn't they? Of course you would want to see like what the family was doing and what this thing turned everybody upside down during COVID-19. Like, that portrait was the year COVID-19 kind of hit the world. And he turned it into a bit. I mean, he was always a photographer, but he turned it into a business. Like, do you want your family photographed? Visit my Facebook. And I thought to myself, wow, what a thought to see someone who has a craft, who's selling a service, selling a product, innovating in the moment, knowing that, okay, it's a risk. I might not get anybody. Girls, it was family after family after family after family I saw posted, and I thought, good for him. I mean, good for him. He didn't let something that otherwise could have closed his business completely close something that he has worked so hard to build. So, as I'm thinking about everything that you all are saying, it's kind of coming home to me that if you do always put the customer first, and you do always allow or develop that message that resonates with you about your business, why did you start it? What was your dream in the beginning? Convey that to the customer. Let them know this was my dream, and this is how my dream was meant to affect you. I think that you can't lose. You know, people, just like that Pfizer moment, people want to hear that human side of any business, and they will flock around it. And I think both of you have really done a great job in illustrating ways that we can, as business owners, capture some of that spirit and share it among our communities. Shira, what would you like a listener, we're down to about the last 10 minutes. I always think these go so quick. We're down to the last 10 minutes. What would you like listeners to know about the work you do, about kind of the thought process that you employ, and about the way it impacts industry and commerce?
So I love what I do. I love to be able to listen to my partners and my clients and be able to extract. Sometimes companies, they know what their mission has been for so many years, right? But when a new, fresh set of ears comes and listens to their story, I always say I pride myself, and I say this humbly, is being able to extract the uniqueness of what companies do, right? And that's where it comes to the marketing meets the PR, and they intersect is identifying those unique stories, right? In the instance we're talking about COVID-19 and life, you know, during COVID and post-COVID is, what does your company offer? What does your company offer during COVID? What is it? Does anybody else ask yourself the question, what makes what I do unique, right? The story that you just told about the photography, right? And by the way, I've seen that through so many other friends on social media as well that have done similar to what he's doing. But really identifying, you know, is what you're doing unique? Does anybody else offer it? Are you the only one that does this in your community, in your state, nationally? You know, these times that are changing, really, and I'll give you an example. The Jewish Community Services of South Florida and their social services agency with 50+ programs for the community. But they had to evolve. They had these community meal sites where seniors went to, and call it the senior social hour, right? Where they receive their lunch and they spend time with their friends. Those congregate meal sites were closed overnight when COVID impacted Miami-Dade County. In that instance, the staff had to adapt and they had to all of a sudden go and deliver meals. But on top of that, some of these seniors that are homebound now needed groceries to be able to take care of themselves. So JCS launched a shopping program where volunteers went and shopped for these seniors and delivered groceries to their doorstep. You know, there's other, you know, unique programs like that out there, that a lot of programs, whether it's exercise programs, whether it's for kids or adults or seniors, went online. So really, when you talk about how do you tell that story of what you do, is really understanding, you know, what's unique about what you're doing. And that's what usually captures the attention of media and others to tell your story for you as well.
Yes, definitely. And Shira, if someone wanted to kind of say, okay, I'm ready, or I think I'm ready, or I'd like to know if I'm ready to, you know, get involved with an assessment or an evaluation, or like what you're saying, you to extract for them, because it's very difficult, you know, as a business owner, you know, you have the world of what you can do in your own mind. And it's so difficult to come up with that concise message of what am I doing and what makes me unique. If they wanted to, if a person wanted to reach out to a company like ADG or other, you know, PR companies in their own areas, how do they go about searching that? And then how do they make that initial reach out?
That's a really good question. You know, I do a lot of engagements through professional platforms like a LinkedIn, or and I make some professional connections that way and have conversations. I personally always welcome the opportunity to speak to anyone that wants to speak with me, whether I end up doing work for them or not. I always feel like it's kind of my way of paying it forward. So anybody who wants to have that conversation, I'd be glad to do that. But you can search your local communities. You can be, living in different states and want to have a PR person that's maybe in your backyard and closer to your community, understands your community. It's just do a search. Go online, do a search, see if there's any reviews about that company, search who their clients might be. Sometimes, depending on who the companies are, you can reach out to those clients and ask them their assessment of that PR agency that they're working with. Almost kind of like your own personal review of the company. Some are available online, some are not. You would have to do some due diligence, find if you have any friends in common and ask, them their professional assessments of that company. So it really depends on what you're looking for.
Yeah, no, I think that that's really helpful, because I do think sometimes we don't know what we need, and we don't even know the steps to take if we do identify, that we might need that. So I definitely appreciate that insight. And Diana, in these last few minutes, from a marketer's perspective, what's your takeaway messages for businesses of really all sizes at this time? Even if it's words of encouragement about, how to kind of tactically approach differentiating, identifying their product, letting people know about it. What would your takeaways be?
Number one, persevere, because this is a temporary situation, although the new normal might look a little bit different than the normal that we're accustomed to. Going back and really having a good understanding of who your customers are, and begin that segmentation process if you haven't already. And that's not just purchasing behavior, but that's a lot of the emotional drivers of your customers. What really makes them tick inside. And that can be done with, seriously, your organization sitting around a table and talking through it and identifying, certain buckets or segments of your customers. From there, you formulate your strategic communication plan, and that'll look a little bit different how you execute it today versus what it might look like 6 months from now. Those sequential sound bites with those, compelling content and distinct call to action. If you don't have a call to action, then it's just white noise for your customer, because oftentimes they want to know what exactly it is that you want me to do, and how am I supposed to do it, and have you made it easy for them to do it? And then, one thing we've touched on maybe more loosely is create that sense of community amongst your customers and pull yourself into that community. So more of an altruistic approach, where you're not the center, you're not the sun and everybody's revolving around you. That's a total rookie marketer tactic. And when you see that happen, you realize that, the listening is not happening, and it's more of the speaking that's happening on the part of the actual company. So, keeping in mind constantly where your customer is and making that adaptation.
And if there are companies that are searching for marketers, maybe they're not big enough to have their own staff marketer, are there ways to reach out to people like you, or to firms that specialize in developing marketing plans and programs?
Yeah, most certainly. And one of the things I did actually for a PR firm several years ago is I identified campaigns that I really liked. And I'm like, I can see this working for my particular brand in the breast cancer space. So through a process of, hunting down and seeing who the point of contact was on particular press releases, I was able to identify that company, go to that company, establish an engagement with that PR firm, and so on and so forth. The same is true of marketers. It's a little harder, I think, to probably discern who a marketing agency might be, or who a particular consultant on a project might be. But I'm blown away by the talent that lives next door, for example. And, leverage social media to sort of find that. You'll get a lot of chaff, but you'll also get some pure gold in there as well. And likewise, I'm in all sorts of volunteering capacities currently, and happy to help anybody who might need a little bit of help trying to understand what their unique offering is and how they may be able to communicated effectively today.
Well, I so appreciate both of you. I've got 1 minute left each, and what I'd really like to do is just ask a direct question of what has this time meant for you? How have you grown through this COVID-19 experience, both personally and professionally? What's been your most significant kind of feeling in this moment? And we by no means are through it. But what so far has been your most significant growth to this point? Shira, I'll start with you.
Of course you will. Okay. You know, it's sometimes as a working mom, we tend to be hard on ourselves and almost create our own level of guilt. I think one of the things that I feel like I've changed through this process of literally being told from one day to the next that my child is now going to be home on Zoom classes. I will never forget, I got the email at like 12:15 on a Friday that starting Monday, your child would no longer be at the school, and we'll be sending her school home stuff, her homework stuff home today with her. And by the way, that's her stuff for the rest of until further notice.
Right.
I've really grown in that as a mom and as a working mom and as a wife, to not be so hard on myself and realize that through this, we're doing the best that we can. So that's part of my personal growth. It's interesting that you asked me about that second part of that question of that moment of what's been most significant. So we chatted in the beginning, you know, I have 3 children at home, all under the age of 6. So it's been hectic. But just today, I was trying to convince my 6-year-old about whether or not she wanted to take a particular art class that's being offered through the summer at her school. And, you know, she loves art. It's her favorite thing to do. And I figured if I can at least get her out of the house for 1 hour, I felt like I was giving her some type of childlike summer, because there are no camps available for us. And her reaction actually surprised me today. And she looked at me and she says, "I just want to be home with you."
Oh.
So here we are thinking that, you know, we want to give them this normal childhood, and we want them to be around other kids, and we want them to go back to school, to be around their friends and their teachers, and we want them to be at camp that's not available to us. Actually, the most important thing to her, whether we're playing all day or not, or even for 10 minutes, her most important thing to her was to be with me. So that just happened earlier today. You know, we've had other moments like that where our favorite thing to do was we camped in front of the house under a tent.
Yeah.
And that was one of the most amazing afternoons. So I think that was a aha moment for me, where my kids just want to be with me. That doesn't matter what we're doing.
Yes, I love that.
That's beautiful.
I love that. Diana, same question for you. What's been your personal and professional aha moments?
Well, this time has afforded me the opportunity to do a little bit more introspection, as far as, you know, what do I want to do with the rest of my life, you know, type of thing, which, you know, luckily I wasn't too far. The answer isn't too far from where I am. So that's a good thing. And it's always good to check in with yourself like that, because if you're caught up in the day to day and you're running 1,000,000 miles a minute, and, you know, you could pick your head up in 3 years and be like, why am I here? And that is not where I am right now. So that's good. And much like Shira said, I have become a family junkie. And by that, I mean, when you were talking about the local photographer, I'm like, oh, hell yeah, I want to have a picture in my backyard where we've been sneaking out. We'll be in front of this tree for that photo, because there's been such a strong sense of family that has really transpired over the past couple of months. And I even said to my husband the other day, I'm like, I'll never be able to do another errand without you. Yeah. You know, because I mean, simply running to Costco or doing whatever, because we're always together doing it.
Yeah.
And that's something, if an introvert can say that, I tell you that. So
yeah. You know, it's so funny that both of you are such high-powered, high-functioning, always on the go, always thinking, always creating. And from my knowledge of both of you and my relationships with both of you, I think you can say the same about me. And yet all 3 of us, our professional and personal takeaways during this time is how important it is to spend time with our family. We always knew that. I can speak for all 3 of us. we always knew that our travel, our intense, sometimes 8 o'clock p.m. when we're leaving the office, we always knew that that wasn't the right thing to do. But just like everything else, just like all the can'ts, well, I can't leave early. Well, I can't stop in the middle of the day to spend time with my child. Yes, you can. You can, and we're doing it now. And the world isn't crumbling. The sky isn't falling. In fact, our relationships are growing deeper. And just like Shira is saying, they're seeing a different life and a different family connection. And they're growing up in ways, when you think about how we grew up and how our parents grew up, dinner time at the table, all those things that we've lost along the years, we now are getting those back. And as tiring as it might be, as frustrating or uncertain as it might be, the reality is that I know I'm not in any rush to get back to those, 12-hour days, those times where I'm missing things, using FaceTime to see my son's middle school graduation because I'm off at a meeting somewhere in California. I'm in no rush to get that part back to my old normal. I want so much of that to stay, and it's up to us to say, no, those are our new boundaries. So I think the takeaways I love that we all share is not just that it's okay that we're prioritizing our family, but it's necessary that we prioritize our family, because that's the only way we get through times like this. So I appreciate so much the both of you. I could talk to you both for the next 6 hours on so many other topics. I am so proud of you both and the work that you do and the way that you impact the world. I can't wait for so many people to listen to this and to have those same feelings and takeaways from your expertise and your wisdom. I thank you for sharing all of what you have tonight with our audience. And I really, really do genuinely look forward to the time that we can get together in person. And for Diana, you and me to have a lemon drop martini. And for Shira, for me to come over and not eat your food, but eat Adam's food. I can't wait for that. And I really do. I pray for you both. I pray for your families. And I thank you for the time that you've spent with us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, good night.